She didn't mean to spill the wine on him. But when the most feared man in Seoul looked up from his blood-stained phone call and sneered at her accent, something inside Zara snapped, and the entire restaurant went silent as red Bordeaux soaked into a $50,000 suit. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just looked at her with those dark, dangerous eyes and smiled slowly, like a man who just found his next obsession. And Zara knew, with every nerve ending screaming in her body, that she had just made the most beautiful and terrifying mistake of her life. Welcome to Echoes of Soul and Africa TV, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The night had started like every other Thursday at Noir, Seoul's most exclusive members-only restaurant tucked behind an unmarked door in Gangnam. Zara Mensah had been working the VIP floor for 8 months, long enough to know which tables tipped well, which ones required invisible service, and which ones she should avoid entirely. Table 9 was always avoid entirely. Reserved every Thursday at 9 p.m., always the same group of men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices and left envelopes instead of credit cards. Her manager, Mr. Park, had briefed her the first week. "Table 9 doesn't exist," he'd said, refusing to meet her eyes. "You serve them, you smile, you don't hear anything, and you don't remember faces." Zara had nodded because she needed this job. Because Seoul was expensive, and her culinary school tuition didn't pay itself, and her student visa didn't leave much room for unemployment. But she hadn't counted on the man at the head of Table 9, being exactly the kind of man her mother had warned her about in 3 languages. Han Seung-jun was the kind of handsome that felt like a warning. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that cataloged everything in a room within seconds, black hair pushed back from his forehead with casual precision. He wore a suit the color of midnight, no tie, top button undone, and had the particular stillness of someone who never needed to prove how dangerous he was because everyone already knew. The sleeve of his jacket sat precisely enough to hide the edge of the ink she glimpsed when he reached for his glass, a tattoo beginning at his wrist, disappearing upward, promising more. Zara had caught herself looking twice and immediately looked away. The trouble started at 9:47, and it started with his voice. She was refilling water glasses when she heard him speaking English to the man beside him, his accent thick and his tone flat with condescension. "Tell the American to send the documents by morning. These foreign consultants always need everything explained twice." He hadn't been talking about her. She knew that. But then his eyes had drifted to her as she reached across the table, and he'd said something in Korean to the man beside him that made 3 people laugh. She didn't speak enough Korean to catch all of it, but she caught the word for clumsy and the word that loosely translated to foreigner who doesn't belong here. It was the laugh that did it. Zara had survived enough boardrooms and break rooms and back-of-house kitchens where people assumed she couldn't hear or didn't understand to know exactly what that laugh meant. She spent 8 months in Seoul being mistaken for lost, being spoken over, being looked through. And she had been graceful about it every single time because she was professional and she was smart and she knew how to pick her battles. But something about the way Han Seung-jun looked at her, while he said it, dismissive, bored, already moving on, made her hand tighten around the wine bottle she was holding. The spill was an accident, mostly. The Bordeaux hit his shoulder and sleeve before she could process what her body had done. The table went silent so completely she could hear the jazz playing 2 floors below. Every face turned to her. Seung-jun went very still in the way that predators go still before they move. Then he looked up at her, and his expression wasn't fury. It was something slower and more dangerous than fury. It was interest. "I'm sorry," Zara said, voice steady even though her heart was slamming. She grabbed her cloth, professional instinct overriding the terror crawling up her spine. "Let me." "Leave it." His voice was quiet, controlled, and absolute. She froze. "What's your name?" He said it the way people said things they already knew the answer to, but wanted to hear spoken aloud. "Zara, I'll have Mr. Park arrange compensation for the—" "I didn't ask about the suit." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an attention that felt like being seen through rather than looked at. "I asked your name." "Zara Mensah." "Mensah," he repeated it like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "Ghanaian." She blinked, Nigerian Ghanaian. Something shifted in his expression, infinitesimal but there. You did that on purpose. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was almost admiring. It was an accident. Her chin lifted a fraction. Sir. The pause that followed lasted 3 seconds exactly. Then he turned back to the table like she'd ceased to exist, and Zara retreated to the service station on legs that only started shaking once she was out of his sightline. Mr. Park found her 2 minutes later, ashen-faced. Do you know who that is? A customer who needed a napkin. Zara, her manager's voice dropped to barely audible. That's Han Seung-jun. He owns half of Gangnam and the other half is afraid of him. He could have this restaurant closed by morning if he wanted to. Then I'll apologize again, and he can decide. But Seung-jun didn't call for the manager. He finished his dinner, conducted whatever quiet business required envelopes and lowered voices, and left at 11 p.m. without another glance at the service station. His table left an envelope as always. Inside was double the normal amount, and a card with 4 Korean characters. Mr. Park translated without her asking. Good reflexes. Zara stared at the card for a long time. The next Thursday, Table 9 was reserved again. Zara requested a different section. Mr. Park transferred her back to Table 9 without explanation. She stood at the edge of the VIP floor at 8:55 with her order pad and her composure firmly in place, watching Han Seung-jun arrive exactly on time. Same suit, energy, different color, navy this time, with a subtle texture that caught the low lighting. He scanned the room as he sat, a habit that looked casual but wasn't, and when his eyes landed on her across the floor, they stayed there a beat longer than necessary. He didn't comment on her presence, neither did she. Professionalism was armor. Except halfway through the evening, a man Zara didn't recognize appeared at the edge of the VIP floor, someone not part of Seung-jun's usual group. He was younger, well-dressed, and he smiled at Zara with the easy confidence of someone who expected smiles in return. You're new, he said in perfect English, leaning against the partition. I've been here 8 months, Zara replied, reaching past him to reset a neighboring table. New to me, he extended a hand. Lim Di-hyun, I'm usually at the bar downstairs. Come find me on your break. I don't take breaks. Come find me anyway. His smile widened. You're too beautiful to be carrying other people's plates. It was a ridiculous line, but he delivered it with such uncomplicated warmth that Zara almost laughed. Almost. The temperature at Table 9 dropped approximately 10 degrees. She became aware of it without looking, a stillness emanating from Seung-jun's direction that was distinct from his usual controlled quiet. When she finally did glance over, his eyes were on Lim Di-hyun with an expression that could only be described as territorial assessment. Lim Di-hyun, for his part, seemed completely unaware he was being measured for a coffin. Thank you, Zara told him pleasantly. Enjoy your evening at the bar. She moved back to Table 9. Seung-jun's gaze moved back to his conversation partner, but the quality of the silence around him had changed. Later, when she brought the dessert course, he spoke without looking up from the document in his hand. You know who that man is. A customer. Lim Di-hyun. His voice held no particular emotion. Junior partner at a firm I'm currently dismantling for embezzlement. He has expensive taste and poor judgment. Zara set the dessert plate down with precision. I'll keep that in mind. Seung-jun finally looked up, and the directness of his gaze made her want to take a step back and also, confusingly, not move at all. Do you speak Korean? Enough. Then you understood Thursday. A pause. Yes. Something that might have been discomfort crossed his face, so briefly she almost missed it. I wasn't speaking about you. I know. But you heard it as if I was. People in service positions often do, Zara said evenly. It's an occupational side effect of being treated like furniture. He studied her. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? The corner of his mouth moved. Every person at this table is. Then they have better information than I do, she straightened. Will there be anything else? He looked at her for another long moment, something working behind his eyes that she couldn't name. No, that will be all. She was at the service station 10 minutes later when Mr. Park appeared with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. He asked for your schedule. Zara turned slowly. I'm sorry. Han Seung-jun, he asked when you work. Her manager had the decency to look uncomfortable. I told him Tuesdays and Thursdays. You didn't ask me. Zara, Mr. Park pressed his lips together. When that man asks for information, you provide it. That's not me being unkind, that's me keeping both our jobs. She went home that night unsettled in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Not afraid, exactly. Something else. The way he'd said you're not afraid of me didn't sound like a threat. It had sounded almost like relief. The following Tuesday, Seung-jun came alone. No group, no envelopes, no late evening meetings. He was seated at table 9 with a single glass of whiskey and his phone when Zara arrived for her shift, and she stopped at the edge of the floor long enough to recalibrate. She walked over. Good evening. Sit down, he said. I'm working. I know, sit down anyway. He nodded at the chair across from him. I've reserved the table, you're my server, sit. That's not how. Zara. The way he said her name was different from how he'd said it the first night, when it had been an act of cataloging. Now it had weight behind it, like a word he'd been turning over in his hands. Please. She sat, because the please surprised her into it. Seung-jun turned his glass slowly. I want to apologize for Thursday. Whatever she'd been expecting, it wasn't that. You don't need to. I do. His jaw tightened slightly, like the words required more effort than he was accustomed to. What I said was dismissive and careless, and you heard it, and the fact that it was directed elsewhere doesn't remove the impact. He looked at her directly. I don't apologize often. I'm doing it because it's warranted. Zara studied him across the small table. Why does it matter to you? You don't know me. No, his eyes moved over her face. But I've been thinking about you since Thursday, and I don't like it when things don't make sense. You've been thinking about me because I spilled wine on you. I've been thinking about you because you looked at me like I was entirely ordinary. He took a slow drink of his whiskey. No one does that. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said something true instead. You're not ordinary. No. But you're also not as frightening as you think you are, to me. His expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of a smile if he'd let it get that far. Tell me about yourself. I'm your waitress. Tell me about yourself anyway. So she did, because the please was still echoing, and because there was something in his stillness that felt, paradoxically, like the safest place in the room. She told him about Lagos and Accra and the years between, about culinary school and the pastry program she was saving for, about her mother who called every Sunday and asked the same 3 questions in rotation. He listened the way she imagined he did everything, with his whole attention, missing nothing, storing it all somewhere she couldn't access. He told her almost nothing in return, just that he'd taken over his father's business at 24 and hadn't slept well since. When her shift ended, he was still there. Let me drive you home, he said. I take the subway. It's midnight. That's when the subway runs. He looked at her for a moment. You're determined to make everything difficult. I'm determined to maintain appropriate professional distance. She picked up her bag. Good night, Mr. Han. Seung-jun. She paused. You called me that in your head the moment you saw me, he said, not a question. Use it. She left without answering, which was answer enough. A few days later, she arrived for her Tuesday shift to find a package at the staff entrance addressed to her. Inside was a culinary reference book she'd mentioned once, in passing, while talking about her pastry program. The kind of textbook that cost what she made in a week. No note, no name, but she knew. She almost sent it back. Instead, she put it in her bag and took it home and read 3 chapters before she admitted to herself that she was in trouble. The following Thursday brought something different. Seung-jun arrived at his usual time, but his expression when he sat was wrong, tighter than usual, something controlled to the point of strain. His men were quieter than normal. The conversations at the table carried an undercurrent she'd learned to recognize over the months of serving this floor. Something had gone badly somewhere. She served the meal without comment, read the room the way good service required, and stayed unobtrusive. But when she brought the final course, Seunjun's hand closed briefly around her wrist as she set his plate down. Not gripping, just contact, there and gone in 2 seconds. She looked at him. His eyes said something she didn't have vocabulary for yet. She poured his water and walked away, and her wrist felt warm for the rest of the evening. After the table cleared, one of Seunjun's men approached the service station. Mr. Han would like a word, privately. She followed him to the private corridor outside the VIP dining room where Seunjun stood, jacket unbuttoned, looking like he'd spent the last few hours carrying something very heavy. "Are you all right?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her like the question had startled him. "Why do you ask?" "Because you looked like that the whole evening, and no one at your table was going to say anything." The muscle in his jaw moved. "There was a situation with someone I trusted." "Betrayal." "Yes." "I'm sorry." She meant it plainly, without performance. He studied her face. "You say exactly what you mean." "It saves time." "Most people say what they calculate will benefit them most." "That sounds exhausting." A breath left him that was almost a laugh, short and unguarded, and she saw for one unprotected second what he might look like if he wasn't in the permanent business of being terrifying. Younger, lighter. "Have dinner with me," he said. "I'm your waitress." "Not tonight. Tonight your shift ended 20 minutes ago." He reached past her and held the corridor door open. "I know a place that does Ghanaian fusion that isn't an insult to either culture. Say yes." She was quiet for a moment. "If I say yes, are you going to be Han Seunjun the entire time?" "I don't know how to be anyone else." "Then bring him along." She walked through the door he was holding. "But he pays." "He always pays." The restaurant was small and improbable and perfect, tucked in a neighborhood she hadn't discovered yet, run by a Nigerian woman married to a Korean chef who had somehow made jollof rice taste like a memory. Seunjun ate everything she ordered for the table, followed her lead on all of it without ego, and told her about his grandmother's cooking in a tone so different from his boardroom voice that she kept glancing at him to confirm it was the same man. He walked her to the subway entrance at midnight. He didn't try to follow her down. "Zara," she turned. He stood at the top of the stairs, hands in his pockets, Seoul's lights making everything look cinematic behind him. "You're going to let me do this again." "Am I?" "Yes." The certainty in his voice held no arrogance, just something that sounded, underneath all that control, like hope. "Because whatever this is, I'm not done with it." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who frightened entire rooms without trying, who had sent her a textbook anonymously, who said please like the word cost him something, who had laughed exactly once tonight, and it had changed the entire shape of his face. "Tuesday," she said, "after my shift." She went down the stairs. Behind her, she heard nothing, but she had the distinct impression that Han Seunjun stood at the top of those stairs longer than was strictly necessary. And that he was smiling. The Tuesdays became theirs. Not officially. Not in any way that could be named or announced or fit into the vocabulary Zara had for relationships, which was limited by the particular wariness of someone who'd watched her mother love men who borrowed her softness and left before paying it back. But after her shift ended, Seunjun would be waiting near the staff exit, not inside, not demanding, just there, and they'd go somewhere he'd found during the week. Somewhere she wouldn't have discovered alone, and eat and talk until midnight pushed them back into their separate lives. He learned her the way he did everything, systematically, thoroughly, with total attention. The way her voice dropped when she talked about food she loved, the way she tilted her head when she was deciding how honest to be, the fact that she always ordered one thing extra and barely touched it because she cooked from abundance even when she was eating in. He remembered everything she mentioned and denied remembering any of it. She learned him more slowly. He revealed himself in edges rather than surfaces, a comment about his younger brother that held more grief than he acknowledged. The way his shoulders dropped exactly 1 degree when they were seated, and no one was watching him. The scar on the back of his right hand that he touched sometimes without seeming to notice. She didn't ask about the scar. He didn't ask about the visa complications she'd mentioned exactly once. They were careful with each other, which made the moments of carelessness matter more. 3 weeks in, she arrived for her Thursday shift to find Lim Di-hyun at the bar downstairs. He spotted her through the glass and waved with the uncomplicated friendliness of someone who genuinely thought the world was a welcoming place. She waved back briefly and kept moving, because she had a section to prep, and she was professional. She didn't think about it again until midway through the evening when she looked up from refilling water at a neighboring table and found Seung-jun watching the bar level through the glass partition. His expression was composed. His hand around his whiskey glass was not. She finished the water, completed her circuit, and stopped at table 9 on her way back to the station. "He's harmless," she said quietly, not looking at him. Seung-jun turned from the window. "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking loudly." The muscle in his jaw moved. "He has poor judgment." "You mentioned that." She began clearing the appetizer plates. "Are you going to be strange about this all evening?" "I'm not being strange. You're gripping your glass hard enough to leave fingerprints in crystal, so." A beat of silence. Then, in a tone he was clearly working to keep level. "Does he interest you?" Zara looked at him directly. "No." Something released in the set of his shoulders, barely visible and immediately controlled. "Good." "But Seung-jun." She waited until he met her eyes. "You don't have the right to ask that question yet." He held her gaze. "Yet," he repeated, the same way she'd said it once, filing it the same way. "Yet," she confirmed, and went back to the service station and pretended her heart wasn't doing something embarrassing. The following Tuesday, he took her to a rooftop she was fairly certain wasn't publicly accessible. The Han Group logo on the building below answered the question of how. They ate takeout on a rooftop overlooking the Han River with the city arranged below them like a lit map. And Seung-jun was quieter than usual, which meant something was working through him that hadn't found language yet. "What happened to your father?" she asked eventually. He was quiet for a moment. "He made enemies. Enemies outlived him." "I'm sorry." "I was 23. By the time I was 24, I dealt with the people responsible." He said it simply, without drama, which was somehow more arresting than if he'd said it with weight. "I'm not sorry. I'm something else about it that I don't have a word for." "That's grief," Zara said. "The kind that doesn't feel like sadness." He looked at her with an attention that made her feel simultaneously seen and slightly exposed. "Your father." "Left when I was 9. Different kind of losing someone. But the same kind of having to become someone else afterward." She hadn't thought of it that way. Yes, exactly that. They sat with that for a while, the river doing its quiet work below them. "Zara," his voice was different, lower, less controlled. "I need to tell you something before I lose the sense to." She turned. He was looking at her with the composure he wore like armor partially disassembled. And beneath it was something so straightforward and unguarded that it changed the temperature of the air between them. "I haven't felt this with anyone," he said. "I'm not building towards something calculated. I'm not running a strategy. I don't know what I'm doing with you, and I'm almost never that person." A pause. "I'm telling you because you deserve honesty from me, and I've been talking around this for weeks, and I'm done talking around it." Zara's breath had done something complicated. "Seung-jun." "I know what I am to people," he said. "I know what they see. Fear is useful, it's easier than the alternative. You look at me and you don't see the fear first, you see past it to whatever is underneath it, and that," he stopped, pressed his mouth together. "That is the most dangerous thing anyone has ever done to me." She could feel the pull of him the way you feel a current, present and patient and capable of pulling you off your footing if you stepped wrong. She stepped. She kissed him, because the alternative was saying something she wasn't ready to say aloud yet, and kissing him was a kind of honesty she could manage. He went very still for 1 second, like her closeness had surprised him, which made no sense for a man who controlled rooms. And then his hand came up to her face with devastating gentleness, and he kissed her back slowly, thoroughly, like there was all the time in the world and he intended to use it. When they broke apart, Soul glittered below them, indifferent and magnificent. "I should go home," she said softly. "I know." He hadn't moved his hand from her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone once slowly. Tuesday. Tuesday. She went home and didn't sleep well, which she chose to interpret as a symptom of the city rather than of Han Seung-jun. The danger arrived, as danger usually does on an ordinary day. It was a Wednesday, not her shift, not their Tuesday, and Zara was at the culinary school's practice kitchen, working through a patisserie module with the textbook he'd sent her open on the counter beside her mixing bowl. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number, and she ignored it twice before answering the third time. "Ms. Mensah." The voice was male, Korean accented, pleasant in the specific way that meant it was performing pleasantness rather than feeling it. "This is a courtesy call. We understand you've developed a personal connection to Han Seung-jun." She set down her spatula. "Who is this?" "People who would like you to reconsider that connection. Mr. Han has made certain business decisions that have been costly to powerful people. You've made yourself visible. That's unfortunate for you." The line went quiet for a moment. "We're not threatening you," the voice continued. "This is a warning, the kind that comes once." The line went dead. Zara stood in the practice kitchen with flour on her hands and her heart going very fast, and spent approximately 90 seconds deciding whether to call Seung-jun. She spent another 30 seconds actually calling him. He answered immediately. "Zara." "Someone just called me." She told him the conversation, word for word, while she washed the flour from her hands. Her voice was level. Her hands were not. The silence on his end lasted exactly 4 seconds. "Where are you?" His voice had done that thing, dropped below his already low register into something that had no room in it for negotiation. "Culinary school, Hongdae campus." "Stay there, don't go outside." A pause. "I'm sending someone." "Seung-jun." "Please." The word arrived the same way it always did, like it cost him something. "Let me do this, please." A car arrived in 12 minutes, a black vehicle with a driver who spoke no English and handed her a phone the moment she got in. Seung-jun's voice was on it before she raised it to her ear. "You're safe." He said it like he needed to say it. "I have my people working on the call. We'll know the source within the hour." "What's happening?" "Someone I'm currently in a legal dispute with decided to escalate. They're looking for leverage." His voice tightened. "They found out about you." "How much about me?" "Your schedule, your school, your address." A pause that held the weight of something she couldn't fully see. "Zara, I need you to stay at my place tonight. I have security there that I trust. Tomorrow we can discuss longer term." "You want me to stay at your home?" "I want you to be safe, and my home is the safest place I can offer you. If you'd prefer somewhere else, I'll arrange it. A hotel with a full security detail wherever you choose. But..." His voice shifted just slightly into something less controlled. "I'd prefer to see you, with my own eyes." She looked out the car window at Seoul moving past. "What's your address?" she said. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building that she should have expected looked exactly like this. Vast and minimal, and arranged with the particular elegance of someone who'd had good taste, and then acquired the budget to pursue it completely. Seung-jun was at the door when she arrived, still in his work clothes, looking at her with an intensity that was both scrutiny and something more private. His eyes ran over her face, her posture checking. "I'm fine," she said. "I know," but he reached out and touched her face briefly, thumb at her cheekbone before stepping back. "Come in." He made tea, which surprised her. Moving around the kitchen with a competence that suggested this was something he actually did rather than something performed for her benefit. She sat at the kitchen island and watched him and let the shaking in her hands work its way through. "Tell me about the voice," he said. "Details." She told him everything again, more slowly this time, and he listened with a focus she'd come to recognize as his version of reassurance. The active, working kind, rather than the performed kind. Park Jun-soo, he said when she finished. The name means something to you. He means I was too patient with a situation that should have been handled already. His jaw tightened. I'm handling it tonight. Seung-jun, she waited until he looked at her. Don't do anything. I'm going to make a phone call, Zara. Restructure a deal in a way that removes his ability to threaten anyone. Legal. His mouth curved slightly at her expression. Mostly. She exhaled. You're impossible. You knew that before tonight. I did, she admitted. They sat across the kitchen island from each other in a silence that was comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Given that 12 hours ago she'd been in a practice, kitchen worried about laminated dough, and now she was in a mafia boss's penthouse while someone restructured her threat landscape. I'm sorry, Seung-jun said. She looked up. This isn't your. It is. His voice was flat. You're in this position because of your connection to me. I knew the risk when I kept pursuing this. He looked at his hands on the counter. I kept pursuing it anyway. I kept showing up anyway, she said. That was mine to decide. He was quiet. Seung-jun, she waited again for his eyes. I'm scared. I want to be honest about that, but I'm not scared of you and I'm not scared of this. She gestured at the space between them. I'm scared of being used as a tool to move someone who matters, and that fear doesn't make me want to leave. The look he gave her was so unguarded it almost hurt to hold. He came around the island slowly, and when he stopped in front of her, the intention in his expression was clear and unhurried, like a man who for once in his life wasn't managing anything. You matter, he said. That's the problem and also the only thing that makes any of this feel real. He kissed her with his hands framing her face, and all of his considerable self-control applied to slowness, to making something that could have been desperate feel instead like a choice made clearly, freely, on purpose. She leaned into him and let herself be held like she was something worth protecting. What happened next unfolded with the particular tenderness of two people who'd been careful for a long time finally deciding to be careless, and the city moved below them, indifferent and magnificent, and for a few hours nothing outside the penthouse required their attention. She woke to light and the smell of actual coffee being made in the kitchen, which was already an improvement on her previous experience with mornings after. Seung-jun was at the kitchen island when she appeared, dressed for a meeting, with a second cup already poured. You're still here, she said. This is my apartment, he said, but his voice was warm underneath the dryness. Last time someone left me a note. He set down his own cup. Who left you a note? Nobody important. She wrapped her hands around the coffee he'd made exactly right. Thank you for last night. The security response or the... all of it. He looked at her across his kitchen with an expression she was learning to read, the one that meant he was feeling something he wasn't sure he had the right to say yet. She was starting to think that in another few weeks, she might know exactly what it meant. The resolution came swiftly and without drama, because Seung-jun operated that way when something mattered. Park Jun-soo's business interests were restructured in ways that removed his leverage over the situation and left him with significantly less power to threaten anyone. Seung-jun explained this to Zara over dinner the following Tuesday, a private room in a restaurant she'd mentioned once wanting to try, with the calm of someone filing administrative paperwork rather than dismantling a threat. And that's it, she asked. That's it. He made a calculation and lost. Seung-jun poured wine. People who threaten things I care about tend to lose their calculations. She looked at him over her glass. Things you care about. He met her eyes. You know what I mean. Say it anyway. A long moment. Then, with the same effort as always, the words that cost him something. People I care about. She smiled. He looked like he wanted to do something about the smile, so she let him. They spent 3 months like that, learning each other's edges, building something in the space between Tuesday evenings, and the moments his security texted her location updates she'd pretended were annoying but secretly found comforting. Between her culinary exams and the business dinners, she started attending as his guest rather than his server, which required entirely different skills, and which she navigated with a composure that he told her, quietly, was extraordinary. "You grew up watching your mother hold rooms together," he said once, watching her work a hand group gala with the same attention to invisible dynamics she'd once used to work VIP dining floors. "I did," she agreed. "Different rooms, same skills." He proposed on a Thursday, because Thursdays had started it. He didn't do it at the restaurant. He did it at the rooftop with the Han River below, the same place she'd kissed him first, which she understood was intentional. The ring was extraordinary and also not the point, which he clearly understood because he barely let her look at it before he was looking at her face instead. "You made me want to be someone's person," he said. "I've spent 15 years being no one's anything except a resource or a threat. You made me want to be a person." His voice was steady with effort. "Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you have what you deserve. Let me be yours." "You already are," she said. "Yes, obviously yes." He slid the ring on her finger, and she kissed him, and soul did its indifferent glittering below them. The wedding was small, because neither of them had the patience for spectacle. Zara's mother flew in from Accra and spent the first 10 minutes interrogating Seung-jun in English and the next 10 crying happy tears, which was a relief. His brother came from Japan. A handful of people who'd actually earned their presence. Vows exchanged in a garden rather than a hall, brief and real, nothing performed. She wore something that made her feel like herself elevated. He wore something dark that fit him perfectly and for once included no visible weapon holster, which she chose to take as a gesture. When the officiant declared them married, Seung-jun kissed her like they were the only two people in the garden, which left his brother laughing and her mother crying again in a good way. They honeymooned somewhere without cell service, which was the closest to peace Seung-jun had come to in 15 years, and which he said, the third morning, was her fault. "Good," she said into his shoulder. "Yes," he agreed, "good." The morning she took the test, 4 months into their marriage, 6 months after the rooftop proposal, almost exactly a year since she'd spilled wine on a $50,000 suit. She sat on the bathroom floor of their home for 7 minutes before she felt ready to move. 2 lines, unambiguous. She found him in his study, and he looked up from the contract in his hands, and she set the test on the desk in front of him without a word. He looked at it, then at her, then back at it. "Zara," his voice had done something she'd never heard from it before, broken slightly at the edges, cracked open. "We're." "Yes." He was out of the chair immediately, hands framing her face with the same gentleness he'd spent a year showing her was his real language, the one underneath the controlled composure and the authority and the 15 years of being a resource or a threat. "I love you." He said it still cost him something every time. He still said it every time anyway. "I love you and I love this and I am going to..." He stopped, pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm going to be terrified for approximately 9 months." She laughed. "You're already terrified." "Yes." His hands moved to her face, her hair, like he was taking inventory of something precious. "Completely, happily." He kissed her forehead. "Completely." 9 months later, Han Seung-jun held his son in a hospital room at 2 in the morning and stood very still the way he went still when something mattered more than he had words for. Zara watched him from the bed, exhausted and luminous in the specific way of having done something extraordinary, and saw the moment he looked down at the small face and every wall he'd ever built came quietly down. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not running when you should have." He carried the baby carefully to her, settled beside her on the narrow hospital bed without asking permission, and looked between his wife and his son with an expression she'd never seen on any face before. "For staying." "Mock you again, I dared you," she said softly. "Back at the beginning." A real smile, full and unguarded, the kind she'd been collecting for a year. "You did." "Best accident I ever had." Outside, Soul moved through its indifferent glittering. The same city where a waitress had spilled wine on the wrong man, where something dangerous and inevitable had woken up in both of them, where fear had turned out to be the beginning of trust rather than the opposite. Inside, a family that should never have found each other held each other in the dark. And somewhere in the quiet, Han Seung-jun, the most feared man in Seoul, was laughing.